The conference room's air conditioning was running like electricity was free. The vent humming overhead. A thin layer of cold sweat still glistened at Vanessa Sullivan's temple, sticking a few strands of hair to her skin. It itched, but she did not dare lift her hand to brush it away. In front of her sat a glass of lemon water. Half the ice had already melted, and beads of condensation gathered on the glass. Her throat was so dry it felt like it was on fire, but her hand stayed pressed tightly against her knee. She did not dare reach for the glass. She was afraid that the moment she moved, everyone at the table would see the slight trembling she could no longer control. Across from her, the head of the partner company, a man in his 40s with a slight belly, slowly pushed the document forward by an inch and sank deeper into the wide leather chair. His tone was unhurried, but every word felt as if it had been dipped in ice and stabbed straight into her lungs. Ms. Sullivan, you've laid out quite an ambitious plan. But can you actually carry it? The moment those words came out, the conference room seemed to drop several more degrees. Vanessa's back straightened instinctively. There was still a smile on her lips, stiff as if it had been drawn there with a ruler. Even at this point, she insisted on clinging to that so-called dignity of a CEO. She was so stubborn it made a person's chest feel tight. Adrian Lawson sat slightly behind and to the side of her, his gaze falling on the tense line of her shoulders. He felt his temples begin to throb. I can make this project work. Please give me a little more time. Her voice was not exactly weak, but the faint instability at the end of it still exposed her lack of confidence. The partner let out a soft laugh through his nose. Time. Ms. Sullivan. We're doing business, not charity. I've heard a little about the state of your company's books. Now you want me to hold inventory, hold channels, and wait with you for some vague, uncertain timeline. Who carries that risk? Vanessa's fingertips tightened sharply. Under the table, the hand she had not used to touch the glass was digging its nails hard into her palm. That pale, delicate skin had probably been marked with crescent-shaped cuts since morning. From signing, calling, smiling, and begging. I can shorten the payment cycle again. She lifted her eyes and looked straight at him, as if making her final struggle. The first batch can also follow your schedule entirely. As for the delivery issue you're worried about, I'll personally supervise the production line. And you supervising it personally will help. The partner cut in quickly and brutally, leaving her no room at all. To put it plainly, Ms. Sullivan, it's not that I don't want to give you a chance. I'm worried that a few days after the contract is signed, your company won't even be able to keep its doors open. When the goods are stuck halfway and the money is hanging in the air. Tell me, who ends up looking the worst? Looking the worst. Those words were like two needles. They pierced Vanessa's face until it turned pale in an instant. The smile was still on her lips, but her eyes reddened uncontrollably. She hurriedly lowered her head and pretended to flip through the documents on the table, as if trying to find some clause that could turn the tide. In reality, anyone could see that she had already said everything she could say. The fire that Adrian had suppressed for so long shot up in his chest. She was already being forced to the edge of the cliff. Why was she still trying to act tough? Did she really think she was made of steel? The partner glanced at his watch. He was clearly preparing to stand up and end this pointless conversation. How about this? Ms. Sullivan, let's stop here for today. Go back and think things through internally. When your side is truly stable, we can talk about cooperation again. After saying that, he reached out and closed the folder in front of him. The soft snap sounded like the last nail being driven into the coffin of her already crumbling company. Vanessa stood up too. Her smile stretched almost to her ears, looking especially tragic. Please reconsider. All the terms are still negotiable. Ms. Sullivan, this isn't about the terms. The man stood, calmly adjusting his cuffs as he looked down at her. It's that I don't want to gamble with you. Gamble on whether your company can survive this month. He did not say the second half aloud, but the contempt in his eyes had already made it painfully clear. Vanessa bit her lower lip hard and still wanted to take another step forward. But Adrian moved before she did. He placed the pen in his hand lightly on the table. Click. The sound was not loud, but it was like a firm full stop, pressing down all her futile movements. If you leave now, it would certainly be the easiest choice. He spoke, his tone as calm as if he were discussing the weather. But the calmer he was, the stronger the pressure that allowed no argument. Only then did the partner shift his gaze away from Vanessa and look at him. Adrian slowly lifted his eyes and leaned back into the broad chair. His posture relaxed. It was as if the intense confrontation just now had been something he had merely listened to from the sidelines. And now that he had heard enough, it was finally his turn to offer a slow summary. However, if you walk out today, the one missing the opportunity will be you, not her. The air froze for 2 seconds. Vanessa turned her head to look at him. Her eyes filled with sudden shock. Her makeup had been light to begin with, after an entire day of struggle. The eyeliner she had carefully drawn at the corners of her eyes had blurred slightly, making her embarrassment and helplessness even more obvious. Adrian did not look at her. His gaze remained locked on the man across from him. What you're worried about comes down to 3 things: money, payment, and channels. I'll cover the money gap. I can increase the advance funding for the first order right now. As for the payment cycle, I'll guarantee it. If her company can't pay back the difference, I'll personally make up the shortfall. The partner's brows moved almost imperceptibly. You'll cover it. Young man. That's a bold claim. It's not a claim. Adrian took out a document he had clearly prepared in advance from the briefcase beside him and pushed it lightly to the center of the table. It's a guarantee. Those few thin pages lay quietly on the polished conference table. They were 10,000 times more useful than Vanessa's pale, powerless promises from earlier. Vanessa turned sharply and stared at him. Her eyes were full of shock. She clearly had not known about this. Or rather, she knew he had been helping her behind the scenes. But she absolutely did not know he had gone this far. Adrian cursed inwardly. Of course. Who else besides me would be willing to clean up this mess for you? And the channels. He ignored her gaze and continued unhurriedly. Aren't you worried that after the goods are pushed out, no one will take over afterward? I've already made arrangements on my end. After the first batch enters the market, 2 main sales lines have already promised to take over. The payment terms can follow whatever pace makes you comfortable. If you withdraw now, all you save is today's trouble of talking. What you lose is the profit you could have steadily eaten later. The partner fell silent. He lowered his head and looked at the pages. The arrogant, assured attitude he had carried earlier had clearly loosened. Vanessa stood beside them, still gripping her own folder, her knuckles turning bluish-white from the force. She wanted to speak, but realized she could not get a single word in. Just a few minutes ago, she had been the commander struggling at the front line. Now, Adrian had quietly taken full control of the entire battlefield. He watched the shifting expression on the other man's face without raising his voice even slightly. You've been in this industry for so many years. I'm sure you can calculate this better than anyone. If her project succeeds, the harder you push her today, the more awkward it will be when you meet later. But if you're willing to leave her a path today, she'll remember that favor. And so will I. Business is nothing more than favors and interests circling back and forth. Isn't it? The partner remained silent for a long time. Finally, he pulled out his chair and sat back down. There was a chance. Vanessa's rigid shoulders visibly collapsed in that instant. But she still did not dare truly exhale. Mr. Lawson. Right. The other man straightened the guarantee documents again. His tone had softened quite a bit. Since you've put it that way, I'll be direct. The price cannot stay the same. It must come down. And the first batch must follow my pace entirely. Fine. Adrian answered cleanly. But the payment milestones must be fixed in the contract. If you delay even one day, don't expect the next shipment to arrive on time. The partner looked deeply at him twice, as if reassessing this young man who had been sitting quietly in the corner all along, wondering just how much he still had hidden in his hand. You don't look like someone just here to accompany his girlfriend for a romantic meeting. Adrian pulled the corner of his mouth into a smile that held no warmth. What can I do? She's been holding on alone. And she was about to collapse. I can't just sit here and watch outsiders bully her. He said it so plainly, as if it were only natural. But precisely that naturalness made Vanessa's ears burn, the heat quickly spreading to her cheeks. She coughed awkwardly. Who was about to collapse? I was just. You could handle it. Adrian finally turned to look at her, a trace of teasing in his eyes. As if he had seen through everything. You were about to cry your makeup off. And you're still pretending. Vanessa glared hard at him. The moisture she had barely forced back into her eyes was shoved back by that glare alone. She was so angry she wanted to stomp on his foot. But because the partner was still there, she could only pull the tip of her high heel back unwillingly. The partner watched the subtle interaction between the two of them. And a real smile finally appeared at the corner of his mouth. The tense atmosphere in the conference room finally dispersed completely. The negotiation that followed went much more smoothly. They went through the details one by one. The price was lowered somewhat. The first batch was also reduced appropriately. But the payment milestones were locked in firmly. And the cooperation intentions on the channel side were clearly written into the memorandum. To put it bluntly, this partnership was not exactly beautiful. Vanessa still took a significant loss. But at least the breath her company had been gasping for at the edge of the cliff had been extended. When all the documents were placed into briefcases, Vanessa looked as though she had just been pulled out of water after nearly drowning. She was drained badly. Before leaving, the partner took the initiative to shake her hand. Ms. Sullivan, the rest is up to you. Don't make today's decision a joke. Vanessa immediately reached out and gripped his hand firmly. Don't worry. I absolutely won't. The conference room door clicked shut. She remained standing there in the posture of seeing the guest off. Her palm icy cold and slick with sweat. Adrian loosened his tie and pulled it down a little. Seeing her stand there unmoving for a long time, he walked over and pinched her wrist. It was freezing. Scared now? Vanessa was still stubborn. Who's scared? I just. You weren't scared. Adrian lowered his head and looked at her, cutting off her pale excuse. You just almost negotiated yourself and your company straight into the ground. She lifted her eyes sharply. Her eyes were still red. Yet she used all her strength to glare at him. Adrian Lawson. Are you determined to piss me off today? Me piss you off? He was so angry at her upside-down accusation that he laughed. Your company was about to stop breathing. And you still wouldn't tell me the truth. If I hadn't been worried and followed you here today. Were you planning to carry it alone until the company went bankrupt? Vanessa opened her mouth. But not a single word came out. Fine. That reaction was basically an admission. This instantly collapsed version of her was actually rare. Usually, she was too unwilling to lose. It was as if everyone naturally assumed she could hack through thorns and carve out a path by herself. But when she was truly forced into a corner, she would panic too. She would be afraid too. She would stubbornly hold on until her eyes turned red. The remaining anger in Adrian's heart dispersed more than half in the face of this silent vulnerability. He lifted his hand and gently used his fingertip to brush aside a loose strand of hair stuck to her forehead by sweat. Let's go. Where? The wedding planning studio. Vanessa was visibly stunned. Now. Now. Adrian took her cold hand and pulled her out without room for refusal. You spent the whole day being angered in a business negotiation. I should at least find a place where you can catch your breath and borrow a little joy. He pulled her downstairs. Her steps were still somewhat unsteady. But I still have a pile of things to handle at the company. It won't die. Adrian opened the car door and pushed her in. It was just dragged back from the gates of hell. Don't say unlucky things like that. The wedding planning studio was almost excessively bright. Everywhere were crystal chandeliers, white veils, flower walls, and exquisite sample albums. As soon as they entered, a cloyingly sweet fragrance rushed toward them. Compared to the oppressive conference room that had felt like a matter of life and death, this place was like switching in 1 second from a brutal battlefield to an unreal romance drama set. It was hard not to feel out of place. As soon as the wedding planner saw them, she immediately greeted them with a smile full of enthusiasm. Mr. Lawson. Miss Sullivan. You're finally here. Looking at your condition today. Oh my. Have you been too busy with work? Vanessa forced a smile. A little. The planner was very good at reading people. She immediately pushed the prepared ice water and delicate desserts in front of Vanessa. No problem. No problem. We can talk slowly. Mr. Lawson has very high requirements for the wedding. Almost everything has to be the best. Vanessa turned to Adrian. What are you overdoing now? I'm not overdoing anything. Adrian opened the thick planning proposal. I just want to give you everything you deserve. Not one thing less. The planner introduced the venue, schedule, wedding dress brands, and on-site arrangements page by page. She spoke enthusiastically, almost spitting with excitement, nearly using her hands to demonstrate how the lighting should fall during the dinner. Vanessa sat beside them, but her eyes kept drifting uncontrollably toward her phone screen. Messages in the company group chat popped up one after another. Her body was sitting here, but her soul was still hanging in the office. Adrian saw it all clearly. This broken ship of a company had just been pulled out of the whirlpool, and she could not even focus on the details of her own wedding. Fine. I'll look for her. Change this venue. He raised his hand and tapped a photo in the sample album. It's too small. The welcome area also looks too narrow. It will feel cramped. The wedding planner nodded immediately like a pecking chick. Of course. Mr. Lawson. You have such a good eye. What do you think about this one? It's our most popular Riverside venue recently. The main wedding dress brand needs to be upgraded. Of course. Go through the schedule again. Don't include those messy, crying, overly sentimental parts. She doesn't like that. The wedding planner covered her mouth and laughed. Mr. Lawson really understands Miss Sullivan's preferences. Only then did Vanessa come back from her phone screen. She rubbed her swollen temples. Don't make it so exaggerated. My company is still a huge mess. The most fatal hole at the company was already plugged today. Adrian's gaze fell on her face. His tone was serious. And our wedding can't keep being delayed. But. No buts. His voice was not heavy, but there was an insistence in it that allowed no negotiation. Vanessa Sullivan getting married must be grand, respectable, and proper. The wedding planner smiled so hard her eyes nearly narrowed into lines. Oh my. That's wonderful. Miss Sullivan. You're truly so lucky. Mr. Lawson is so attentive to everything about you. Vanessa froze for a moment. As if the word lucky had gently touched a string in her heart. She looked at Adrian. The tense line of her mouth that had lasted all day finally softened into a small, genuine smile. All right. Stop flattering me. No flattery. Adrian pushed the proposal back to the planner. Just raise the budget. Don't think about saving me money. The planner let out a delighted wow. And her pen flew across the paper as she wrote notes. Vanessa was still symbolically stopping him. That's too wasteful. But this time, she did not truly stop him again. The venue. He chose. The wedding dress. He decided. Every detail of the process. She only nodded when directly asked for her opinion and said softly, anything is fine. Or, you handle it. That sentence, you handle it, seemed like complete trust. It also seemed like distracted convenience. At first, Adrian did not think much of it. He even felt a little soft-hearted. She was truly exhausted today. To be this tired and still sit here with him, pushing the wedding process forward, was already good enough. But for one instant, he saw her lowering her head to reply to work messages. Her mouth was relaxed, but there was not a single trace of light in her eyes when she looked at him. That distraction was not merely fatigue. It was more like someone who had just climbed back from the edge of a cliff, thinking only about how to stand more firmly on higher ground. And the person beside her, the one who had been holding her all along, had instead become someone she assumed would never let go. Someone she no longer needed to look at. He stared at her for 2 seconds. That indescribable discomfort in his heart had just started to surface when he forced it down again. Forget it. Don't ruin her mood today. The proposal was finalized quickly. The venue was upgraded. The wedding dress was upgraded. The banquet process was completely redone. Even the wedding favors for guests were raised by a full tier. Money flowed out like water. And Adrian did not even blink. When they came out of the studio, the sky was already completely dark. Rows of neon lights along the street were lit, and the night breeze finally cleared away the daytime heaviness and heat. Vanessa stood on the steps outside the studio and let out a long breath. She was like a plant that had been scorched by the sun all day and finally came back to life a little at night. Today. Thank you. Her voice was much softer, carrying a trace of post-exhaustion tenderness. If not for you, my side really would have been in trouble today. Adrian looked at her soft side profile outlined by the streetlight and smiled. Just one dry thank you. Then, I'll treat you to dinner. Sure. He opened the passenger door for her like a gentleman. But keep it on the account first. When you're truly done being busy, pay me back double. Vanessa bent down and got into the car, casually responding, okay. She agreed too naturally. So naturally that it seemed as if him filling the funding hole for her company, holding up the negotiation for her, and finalizing every detail of the wedding for her one by one was how things were supposed to be. Adrian got into the driver's seat, closed the door, and rested his hand on the steering wheel. He was truly tired, but an indescribable sense of satisfaction still rose in his heart. Her company had been saved. Their wedding had also been set. He thought that what he was doing was paving the rest of the future, brick by brick, for the person he loved. He put money on the line. He put favors on the line. Even the dignity she had dropped in that conference room today, he had carefully picked up for her, wiped clean, and placed back on her CEO seat. But outside the car window, the city lights flickered past like a flowing river of stars. He turned his head and glanced at Vanessa. She was lowering her head, focused on replying to messages on her phone. She did not notice him looking at her at all. For some reason, his chest felt as though something had lightly scraped against it. She had stood back up, but her gaze no longer seemed to fall toward him as often. An entire row of white wedding dresses hung beneath warm yellow spotlights. Lace and tiny crystals refracted fragmented light, dazzling to the eyes. The wedding planner held a tablet, her smile professional and her voice sweet in exactly the right measure. Ms. Sullivan. This latest version of the entrance process was the one you personally called to modify last time. You said you wanted the exchange of vows moved earlier and both parents' speeches pushed later. Do you remember? Vanessa sat on the soft sofa with her legs crossed, her phone screen facing down on her knee. But that screen lit up on its own every so often, casting brief halos of light across the silk fabric of her dress. Her body had come. Her soul had not. The planner had nearly shoved the tablet into her face before she seemed to wake from a very distant dream, lazily lifting her eyes. Whatever is fine. The wedding planner's smile clearly stiffened. What? Whatever is fine. She quickly swiped to the next page, trying to recover the topic. Then what about the dress? The main gown you chose before was this V-neck, fitted waist, long train design. The reception dress was changed to burgundy velvet, and the veil length was also confirmed by you personally. Today only needs final measurement confirmation. Anything. The moment those 3 words came out, even Vanessa's assistant, who had been standing slightly bowed beside her, did not dare lift her head. She held the folder in the corner, her fingers unconsciously picking at the paper edges until they were nearly curled. Adrian sat directly opposite Vanessa. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his posture casual, and a thick stack of venue albums and guest lists lay by his hand. He had been marking details with a pen. Now, hearing her words, he slowly lifted his head and looked at her. He did not speak immediately. That one look was already enough. He knew Vanessa Sullivan too well. She had never been someone who would say anything about something important. For a project proposal at her company, she could be so strict that she would not let a single punctuation mark go. For a once-in-a-lifetime wedding, she had clearly been excited not long ago, telling him the veil was too long and would make her look shorter and less fresh. How had everything suddenly become anything today? Please. This wedding belonged to 2 people. But the way she was acting now made it look like he was the only one enthusiastically preparing the celebration. Adrian closed the album in his hand. The sound was not loud, but it made the atmosphere in the room heavier. His voice remained steady, without audible emotion. The main gown stays with the previous choice. Don't change the entrance order either. Move the vows earlier. Remember to make the lighting warmer on site. Not too cold. The wedding planner acted as if she had found her savior and immediately agreed in a string. Yes. 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 Mr. Lawson remembers everything so clearly. See. That's wonderful. Although she praised him aloud, her gaze could not help drifting toward Vanessa, clearly growing confused too. Adrian turned his face. His gaze fell on Vanessa. If you're really busy, I can decide the details. But at least take a look. Okay. His tone was not heavy. It even carried a bit of effort to smooth things over and give her a way down. But precisely that gentle tone was the most choking. Vanessa flipped over the phone that had been face down. The screen happened to light up again. Her hand paused. As if burned. She quickly pressed the screen dark. When she lifted her head again, her face carried a faint impatience she could no longer fully suppress. Weddings are all basically the same. You can decide. The things at my company are far more urgent than this. As soon as she finished speaking, an older relative or friend from Adrian's side who had come along coughed awkwardly, clearly trying to ease the tension. Vanessa. Both families' elders have been calling these past few days to ask about the schedule. The hotel is also waiting for our final confirmation. If the invitations are delayed any longer, it really will be too late to send them. I know. She answered quite casually, without even an extra expression. The room fell completely silent. The previously lively atmosphere of discussing dress fittings and process changes seemed to have had all the oxygen sucked out of it. The wedding planner stood there holding the tablet, unable to advance or retreat. Her professional smile was almost frozen on her face. Adrian looked at Vanessa quietly. His Adam's apple moved once. His face still looked calm. She was clearly sitting right here. So where had her soul flown? Vanessa's phone vibrated again. This time she failed to hide it. And the screen lit up clearly. Adrian's peripheral vision swept across it accidentally and saw only one name flash at the top of the screen. Julian Wells. His fingers paused at the hard edge of the album. He did not move. Vanessa had already stood. I have to go. The company has an urgent document that needs me to go back and handle it immediately. It came up suddenly. It's very urgent. Vanessa's assistant immediately understood and added, though her voice sounded weak. Yes. Headquarters has indeed been calling urgently. The wedding planner instinctively asked. Then. The rest of today's process. Another day. Vanessa picked up her bag. From beginning to end. She did not spare another proper glance at the main gown hanging among that row of wedding dresses. Adrian did not stop her. He only lifted his head and looked calmly at her face. Do you still want to go see the evening venue set up together? Vanessa's steps paused. We'll see. What time is we'll see? He asked one more question. She finally frowned. The impatience in her tone completely impossible to hide. Adrian Lawson. I really don't have time to discuss this with you right now. The moment those words came out, Vanessa's assistant went pale. The wedding planner looked as though she wished she could transform into a potted plant on the spot. Adrian looked at her quietly for 2 seconds. Then he suddenly smiled. All right. Go handle your work. His attitude was too gentle. So gentle that even the people beside him felt a sharp embarrassment on his behalf. Vanessa seemed to realize that her tone had been too harsh just now. Her lips moved. But in the end, she did not explain anything. She turned and left. Her high heels struck the polished floor with clear taps. Walking faster than anyone else. The door shut with a bang. Only then did the wedding planner carefully speak. Mr. Lawson. Then these confirmation items today. Should I keep them according to the original plan for now? Adrian picked up the detailed wedding schedule on the table. Flipped through 2 pages casually. Then closed it again. Leave it for now. He paused. Then added. Don't touch the wedding dress either. The wedding planner hurriedly nodded. Of course. We'll follow your instructions. Adrian leaned back into the sofa again. His fingers unconsciously pressing against the metal edge of his phone. His expression remained faint. But the thorn in his heart had already buried itself solidly. It wasn't that she was busy. It was that she didn't want to. Vanessa left the studio without slowing her steps. After turning the corner in the hallway, she immediately took out her phone. Her assistant jogged after her, lowering her voice. Ms. Sullivan. Are you really going to see him? Mr. Lawson's expression just now was already a little. Just cover for me. But the wedding. I said. Cover for me. Vanessa's tone was not heavy, but the irritability in it could no longer be hidden. The assistant could only shut her mouth and quickly step forward to press the elevator button for her. Her expression painfully conflicted. Downstairs. The wind was strong and cold. Vanessa got into the car. She did not return to the company. Instead, she went directly to the cafe not far from the company building. She claimed there was an urgent company matter. Yet she did not even enter the company doors. She turned the corner and went into the cafe. If Adrian had seen that, he probably would have laughed from anger on the spot. By the window of the cafe sat a man. He wore a white shirt. The cuffs meticulously rolled to his forearms. A simple watch rested on his exposed wrist. He looked clean and sharp. When Julian Wells lifted his head, he first looked at her quietly for a few seconds. Then he slowly smiled. Just like he had many years ago when they were still on campus. With a deliberately softened tenderness. Just that one word. Vanessa stood where she was, feeling as if something had tightened around her chest. So annoying. She had not even sat down yet. And those stale old accounts were already surging up. She walked over and placed her bag on the chair beside her. What exactly do you want from me? I don't have much time. Julian did not rush to answer. He only pushed the coffee he had already ordered toward her. You still like this? You haven't changed at all. Vanessa lowered her eyes and saw that it was the caramel macchiato she had ordered most often in college. Her fingers touched the warm cup. And her heart became even more chaotic. Stop beating around the bush. Julian looked at her and paused for a while before speaking in a low voice almost like a whisper. Are you really going to marry him? Vanessa's breathing stopped abruptly. The invitations are about to go out. What do you think? But the reason I came back this time was to make up everything I owed you back then. He said the sentence very slowly. The end of every word was pressed low. Like a feather deliberately brushing against the most sensitive part of a person's ear. Vanessa could not answer for a moment. As for why they had separated back then, the reason was not noble at all. At that time, Julian had been obsessed with going abroad to make something of himself. When the opportunity came, he left quickly and ruthlessly, without even leaving her a proper explanation. She had been so angry that she smashed her phone in her rented apartment in the middle of the night. The next day, she still had to put on makeup and pretend nothing had happened before going to work. She had always thought she had swallowed that suffocating grievance long ago. But she had not. Some people were just that infuriating. After years apart, they appeared again and said one light sentence. What I owed you. And reopened a scar that had already scabbed over, exposing the raw, bloody flesh underneath. Vanessa pulled at the corner of her mouth, trying to laugh, but failed. What use is it for you to come back and say this now? I'm getting married. Julian lowered his eyes, as if laughing at himself. Or perhaps not laughing at all. I know. That's why I originally shouldn't have come to bother you. He lifted his head again and looked at her with burning eyes. But I tried. It didn't work. I can't forget you. The line was so old-fashioned it was almost crumbling. Yet when those old-fashioned words came from his mouth, Vanessa's eyes still heated uncontrollably. So damn annoying. Seeing that she did not speak, Julian instead retreated slightly with apparent restraint, as if trying to hold himself back. Forget it. It's my fault today. I shouldn't have disturbed you. As long as you're doing well, that's enough. I just couldn't help wanting to see you one more time. After seeing you this once, I'll leave. That move was even more shameless than the earlier I can't forget you. Vanessa knew full well Julian was using retreat as an attack. Yet that sentence, after seeing you this once, I'll leave, still made her chest feel blocked. Back then, he had left too decisively. So decisively that every reason she later found to hate him like a madwoman seemed like a one-woman show. Now he had returned so lightly that as long as he lowered his head and said he couldn't forget her, the dignity she had forced herself to build over these years could be overturned completely. She picked up the coffee and took a sip. It was sickeningly sweet. It had clearly been her favorite taste in college. Now that it slid down her throat, only an indescribable sourness remained. Julian. She placed the cup back on the table, her fingertips lingering on the rim. I'm a mess right now. Don't say things like that anymore. Julian did not pressure her. He only laughed softly. Okay. I won't. The more he acted like this, the heavier the irritation in Vanessa's heart became. She would rather he be as proud, direct, and reckless as before, laying all the choices in front of her without restraint. She did not want to see this restrained, forbearing version of him now, because he looked too much like the wronged one. But the person who had truly been abandoned was clearly her. Her phone vibrated again. She lowered her head and looked. It was a message from Adrian. "I'll go to the hotel tonight to confirm the lighting. Let me know when you're done." A short line. No questioning. No dissatisfaction. Not even the matter of her attitude in the wedding studio was mentioned. As if he had gently brushed it aside. Vanessa stared at that line for a long time and suddenly felt a little unable to breathe. Adrian had always been like this. If she was cold, he stepped back half a step. If she was busy, he took over the remaining matters for her. If she was about to collapse, he stood in front of her and blocked all the ugly words, ugly faces, and ugly holes for her. His goodness was too steady. So steady that sometimes she even forgot he could hurt too. "Mr. Lawson treats you very well." Julian's voice suddenly sounded. Vanessa looked up and realized he had also seen the message on the screen. She instinctively turned the phone face down. Her brows furrowing. "You're looking at my phone." "Sorry." Julian apologized quickly. His attitude impossible to fault. "I only saw it by accident." He paused. And his voice lowered further. I'm not trying to ruin anything for you. It's just that if I don't say some things now, I may truly never get another chance." Again. Vanessa closed her eyes. But she did not leave. She could clearly have picked up her bag, turned around, returned to the wedding planning studio, and told Adrian, "I was wrong just now. Let's finish looking at the remaining details." But she did not. She sat in front of that overly sweet coffee and listened to Julian talk about how difficult his years overseas had been. About how he thought of her on every late night. About how he had finally gathered enough leverage to come back and place the future he had not given her back then in front of her again. At the end, he took a document from his briefcase. When Vanessa saw the words investment intent letter on the cover, her eyes finally changed. Julian pushed the document to her. "I've looked at your company's project. The cash flow is tight. But it's not beyond saving. This time, I came back with resources from an overseas fund. As long as you nod, I can help you fill the next funding round." Vanessa's fingers hovered above the document. "What are the conditions?" "No harsh conditions." Julian looked at her. "I only want one chance. A chance to stand beside you again." That sentence was more dangerous than any business clause. Vanessa understood that. After all these years in the business world, there was no way she could fail to hear the ambiguity and exchange inside those words. But she also knew too clearly the situation her company was in now. Adrian had helped her plug one hole today. But behind it were the production line, channels, employee wages, bank collections, each one like a rope around her neck. What Julian handed her was not a document. It was the breath she lacked most right now. "I need time to think." "Of course." Julian smiled. Gentle and certain. "I'll wait for you." That night, Adrian waited at the hotel until 10:30. The lights in the banquet hall were adjusted one by one. Warm light fell onto the empty runway. The white roses had not all been placed yet. Only a few staff members pushed racks back and forth through the hall. The planner stood beside him, checking her phone for what felt like the 100th time. "Mr. Lawson." Miss Sullivan sighed. "Should I call again and ask?" "No need." Adrian stood in front of the main stage, holding the final confirmation schedule in his hand. His gaze resting on the vows section. The person he was waiting for never came. When his phone finally lit up, he almost immediately lowered his head. Vanessa had replied with only 4 words. "Too busy tonight." Adrian looked at those 4 words and suddenly smiled. The smile was shallow and cold. Busy. So busy she did not even offer an explanation. He handed the schedule to the planner. His voice still steady. "The lighting follows the version from just now. Don't wait for her." The planner's heart tightened. But she could only nod. "All right, Mr. Lawson." When Adrian walked out of the hotel, the night wind blew his suit jacket slightly open. He leaned against his car and lit a cigarette. The spark flickered between his fingers, making his usually gentle face look strangely cold and hard. He did not like investigating her. For two people who had reached the point of marriage, trust was the most basic thing. But he liked even less the feeling of being a fool. Of laying all his cards in front of her while she took the confidence he gave her and went to meet another man. Early the next morning, His assistant delivered the information to his office. Mr. Lawson. Julian Wells's background from the past 3 years has been confirmed. Adrian opened the first page. After reading only a few lines, his brows darkened. The so-called overseas fund Julian mentioned did indeed exist. But he was not a core decision-maker of the fund. He was only a project partner pushed to the front. The money he could mobilize was not small. But it was not clean either. The funds had been routed through several layers. And the actual controller behind them pointed to the Whitmore family. The Whitmore family was precisely the competitor that had been trying to swallow Vanessa's company for years. Adrian threw the document onto the desk. He didn't come back to save her. He came back to open the door for the Whitmores. The assistant asked quietly, "Should we tell Miss Sullivan?" Adrian was silent for several seconds. Tell her. Would she believe it? Yesterday. In the wedding studio. She had already written the answer all over her face. She thought he was making a fuss over nothing. She thought he was using the wedding to hold her back. She thought his concerns were not as important as one urgent company document. If he told her now that Julian was dirty, she would probably frown and ask him, "Adrian Lawson, can you stop targeting him? Fucking ridiculous." He rubbed his brow. His voice faint and without anger. "Organize a copy of the materials and send it to her. Also, pause the additional funding on the personal guarantees I made before." The assistant froze. Adrian lifted his eyes. "I said pause. Not withdraw." In the end, he still could not be ruthless. But after that file was sent, all he received from Vanessa was one phone call. On the phone, her voice was tired and impatient. "Adrian Lawson. Why are you investigating him?" He sat before the floor-to-ceiling window in his office. Hearing that sentence, the last shred of hope in his heart was twisted gently and silently shattered. "Did you finish reading what I found?" "I read it. And you still plan to sign his investment intent?" The other end of the line was silent for 2 seconds. Vanessa said, "It's only an intent letter. Not a final agreement. And right now, he can indeed help me. You know what condition the company is in. I can't miss every possible path because of some personal emotion between you two." Personal emotion. Those 4 words were so light, yet unbearably heavy. Adrian nodded. Even though she could not see it, he still nodded. "So you think my warning is personal emotion?" "That's not what I meant." "Then what do you mean?" Vanessa was momentarily stuck by his question. And her voice cooled. "I really don't have the energy to argue with you about this right now. You've helped me a lot. And I'm grateful. But the company is mine. I have to make my own decisions." "Fine." He did not say the word aloud. But it slowly settled in his heart. The company was hers. Julian was someone she chose to trust. The road was also one she chose to walk. Holding the phone, he suddenly felt that all his persistence during this period had become absurd. It was not that he had nothing of his own to do. Lawson Capital was negotiating a cross-border acquisition. He had countless projects far more worthy of his time. Yet he had been like a man possessed. Stuffing himself into the mess of her life. Picking up bad accounts for her. Negotiating partnerships for her. Laying out her wedding for her. In the end, he received one sentence. "I have to make my own decisions." "Okay." Adrian's voice was so calm even he was surprised. "Then make your own decision." After hanging up, he placed the phone face down on the desk. A long time later, he called in his assistant. "For the wedding side, pay all expenses as usual." The assistant asked carefully. "Then should the process continue moving forward?" Adrian looked out the window. Traffic flowed below. Every car seeming to have a clear direction, while only he stood in place, trapping himself into a joke. "Continue." He paused. Then said, "But starting today, matters concerning her company no longer need to go through me for direct handling. Stop all new support." Some people had to fall hard before they knew who had been holding them up all along. During the final week before the wedding, Vanessa was so busy her feet barely touched the ground. Julian's investment intent soon spread through the company. At executive meetings, everyone looked as if they had finally seen a life-saving straw. Suppliers who had previously avoided her also began loosening their stance again. It was not that she had not seen the information Adrian sent her. But every time she wanted to read it carefully, Julian would appear in front of her at exactly the right moment. The Whitmores are indeed involved in part of the funding. But that doesn't mean they can control the project. Business cooperation is always a web of interests. You can't block every road because of one sentence from Mr. Lawson. He sounded too reasonable. Reasonable enough that Vanessa even persuaded herself. Adrian did not understand her difficulty now. Or rather, he was too strong. So strong that he was used to arranging everything for her in his own way. But she was Vanessa Sullivan. She was not some fragile vase waiting to be protected in someone's palm. What she wanted was leverage that could keep the company alive. Not an expensive, beautiful wedding. She repeated this explanation to herself again and again. By the end, she believed it. Until the wedding day. The hotel banquet hall had been decorated beautifully. Crystal chandeliers hung from above. White roses formed a soft floral path along the aisle. Warm light fell on every guest's face. As if all the ugliness had already been painted over into blessings. Adrian stood at the end of the aisle in a black tuxedo. He was especially quiet today. His features were clean. His posture straight. Like a painting carefully placed in a frame. The guests whispered praise. Saying that this Lawson family heir was usually low-key. But standing here today, he somehow made the entire banquet hall brighter. When Vanessa walked in on her father's arm, she saw him too. In that instant, her heart suddenly trembled. The chaos, arguments, and avoidance that had accumulated over the past few days receded like the tide. She saw Adrian standing there, quietly waiting for her. And an almost wronged soreness rose in her heart. She thought maybe after today, everything would get better. The company would get better. They would get better too. But just as she reached the middle of the floral path, the banquet hall doors were suddenly pushed open from the outside. Everyone turned at the same time. Julian Wells walked in wearing a white suit and holding a bouquet of glaring red roses. The scene was too absurd. So absurd that at first, no one reacted. Some guests even thought it was some surprise segment arranged for the wedding. Until Julian stopped in the middle of the aisle and dropped to one knee. He looked up at her. His voice traveling through the microphone across the entire banquet hall. 3 years ago. I missed you once. Today. I don't want to miss you a second time. The whole room erupted. Vanessa's face instantly turned white. She instinctively looked toward Adrian. He stood at the end of the aisle and did not move. Across the long floral path. The way he looked at her was very calm. So calm it seemed as if he had already expected this scene. Julian opened the ring box. I've brought the investment agreement. As long as you're willing to leave with me, I'll give you all the resources. I don't just want to save your company. I want to bring you back to my side. The moment these words came out, Vanessa's father's expression changed on the spot. The whispers from the guests grew louder and louder. Like water boiling over. Isn't this a wedding-crashing proposal? Ms. Sullivan couldn't really have something with him. Could she? The Lawson family is still standing right there. This is too ugly. Ugly. That word again. Vanessa's fingers went cold. And her mind became a mess. She knew she should immediately refuse. She should have security take Julian out. She should walk to Adrian and tell him this was only an accident. But Julian's next words nailed all her reason to the floor. The funding expires today. If you finish this wedding, the Whitmores will withdraw immediately. Your company's debt will be called early by the bank tomorrow. He did not say those words into the microphone. He lowered his voice so only she could hear. Vanessa's pupils constricted sharply. So this was the real condition. He had not come to beg her. He had come to force her. But in this moment, it was too late. Standing under the eyes of all the guests. Standing under Adrian's terrifyingly calm gaze. She suddenly felt that the path of white roses beneath her feet did not lead to a wedding altar. It led to a pit that had been dug long ago. Julian raised his voice. Will you marry me? The entire banquet hall became terrifyingly quiet. Vanessa looked at Adrian. Her lips moved, wanting to call his name. But Adrian moved before she did. He removed the groom's boutonniere from his chest. The motion was slow, steady, as if placing the final period on this absurd scene. Vanessa's eyes instantly reddened. She suddenly panicked. Adrian. But Julian grabbed her wrist. Don't forget your company. The company. Those two words were like a knife pressed to her throat. She closed her eyes. Her voice was so soft it was almost inaudible. I will. But the banquet hall was too quiet. Even the softest voice was enough for everyone to hear. Adrian smiled. There was no mockery in that smile. No anger. It was even gentle. He placed the boutonniere on the ceremonial table beside him and turned to walk out. No questioning. No argument. No hysteria. He simply walked away cleanly. Like finally opening his eyes from a dream he should have awakened from long ago. Vanessa's chest suddenly emptied. And instinctively, she wanted to chase him. But Julian tightened his grip on her. Don't let all your efforts go to waste. She froze where she was. When Adrian reached the door, her voice finally broke free behind him. Adrian Lawson. His steps paused. Her voice trembled. Listen to my explanation. Adrian did not look back. No need. 2 words. Clear and light. Yet Vanessa felt as if she had been punched in the chest. He continued walking out, giving instructions to the assistant behind him as he went. Notify the hotel. All guests dine as usual today. I'll pay the bill. Notify finance. Stop all new personal guarantees under my name for Sullivan Group. Notify legal. Sort out all liabilities related to the wedding cancellation. Do not pursue the Sullivan family. The assistant answered softly and followed behind him. Finally, Adrian stood outside the hotel and looked back at the brightly lit banquet hall. Inside were the flowers he had personally chosen, the lights he had personally decided, the schedule he had revised page by page, and the woman he had once wanted to marry and bring home. He looked for 3 seconds, then withdrew his gaze. Let's go. After that day, Adrian disappeared completely from Vanessa's world. He did not block her, but every call she made was never answered. Every message she sent remained delivered and nothing more. At first, Vanessa thought he was merely angry. She even carried an absurd certainty that once the company got through this breath, once she handled Julian's side, she could go find Adrian and explain properly. But reality did not give her the chance to explain. Julian's investment did arrive. Sullivan Group was like a patient forcibly injected with adrenaline. In just half a year, 3 new business lines reopened. And the financial statements looked extremely impressive. The media began writing about how she had fought her way out of the wedding crashing scandal. The business world began praising her courage. Some even said that after Adrian left, she had finally broken free from dependence. Vanessa heard those words and only found them piercing. But she did not refute them, because the company really was moving forward. Until the first business line exploded. The Whitmore's funding appeared to be saving her. But in reality, every dollar was tied to betting clauses. Julian kept saying he would cover her. But when problems truly arose, he withdrew faster than anyone. The supply chain broke. Channel payments were delayed. Banks called loans early. The risks Adrian had once suppressed rose layer by layer like pus suddenly spilling from an old wound. In the first year, Vanessa could still hold on. In the second year, she began selling assets, cutting executives, and personally standing outside a bank manager's office from 8 in the morning until 10 at night. In the third year, Julian disappeared. He left as decisively as he had back then. The only difference was that back then, he left her with an old love. This time, he left her with a table full of debt, core clients sucked away by the Whitmores, and a company that could be liquidated at any moment. Vanessa finally understood that not a single sentence in the materials Adrian had sent her back then had been unnecessary. But she understood too late. In the winter 3 years later, the sign for Sullivan Group still hung at the top of the building. But half the people below had already left. The conference room was bitterly cold. Vanessa sat at the head of the table, a cooperation application in front of her. She had lost a lot of weight. The sharp beauty that once belonged to a CEO was still there. But her features carried exhaustion that could no longer be hidden. When her assistant handed over the document, she did not dare speak too loudly. Ms. Sullivan, this is the last company willing to talk. Vanessa opened the cover. When she saw the company name, her fingers stopped. Lawson Capital. She froze for a long time. It was not as if she had not heard this name over the past 3 years. After Adrian left her, Lawson Capital seemed to have suddenly broken a seal. Investments, acquisitions, restructurings. Every step was precise. In just 3 years, he had gone from the low-profile heir of the Lawson family to Chairman Lawson, a figure everyone in the business world feared. She had even seen him on financial news. In the footage, the man wore a dark suit and walked out of an overseas acquisition press conference, followed by a full row of executives. Reporters chased after him and asked about his view on marriage and relationships. He only said lightly, "I don't invest in uncertain people. And I don't look back at projects that have already lost money." That sentence was reposted by many people as a golden business quote. Only Vanessa knew who it was meant for. "Ms. Sullivan," her assistant reminded her softly. Vanessa came back to herself and lowered her eyes. Originally, she had not wanted to beg him. Pride, guilt, embarrassment. Over the past 3 years, she had walked every road she could, except going to Adrian. But now, Sullivan Group could not hold on anymore. There were still hundreds of employees in the company. There was still a group of old workers in the old factory district who had followed her father for half their lives. She could pay the price for her own choices, but she could not drag everyone down with her. She picked up the pen and signed her name on the last page of the cooperation application. Send it over. 3 days later, in the top-floor office of Lawson Capital, the secretary placed a file in front of Adrian. Chairman Lawson. Sullivan Group submitted a cooperation application with a debt restructuring plan attached. They hope Lawson Capital can take over the channel side of the new materials project and provide them with a bridge loan. Adrian was reading an acquisition proposal and did not even lift his eyes. The secretary hesitated, then added, "The person in charge signed it as Vanessa Sullivan." The tip of his pen stopped. The air was quiet for 2 seconds. Adrian finally raised his eyes. 3 years had passed. His features were steadier than before. And colder. The man who once would take everything upon himself because Vanessa said she was tired had been polished by time and betrayal into something else. He took the document and turned to the last page. The familiar signature lay there. The strokes were still beautiful, but the tail end trembled slightly. Adrian looked at that line and suddenly smiled. "I'll personally handle this meeting." The secretary froze. "Should I arrange an ordinary conference room? Or conference room 1? Adrian closed the file. "Use the highest standard." The secretary was a little surprised. Adrian leaned back in his chair. His tone faint. "After all, she's an old friend. The scene should be proper." When Vanessa stepped into Lawson Capital again, it was on a gloomy afternoon. The elevator rose all the way up, the numbers jumping continuously. She stood before the mirrored wall and saw how pale her face looked. Today, she wore an ivory suit. Her makeup was refined, and not a single strand of hair was out of place. But only she knew that the cold sweat in her palms had not stopped since she got out of the car. The elevator doors opened. The secretary was already waiting. "Ms. Sullivan. This way please." Conference room 1 was even larger than she had imagined. Outside, the floor-to-ceiling windows were low. Heavy clouds and the steel forest of the entire city. Adrian sat at the end of the long table. He did not stand. The moment Vanessa saw him, her throat felt blocked by something. 3 years. She had imagined countless scenarios of seeing him again. Maybe at a reception. Maybe on some street corner. Maybe after she finally gathered the courage to wait downstairs at his office. But she had not imagined it would be in a conference room like this. She came with a company on the brink of bankruptcy and sat across from him, begging him to leave her a path to survival. Chairman Lawson. She spoke with difficulty. The moment that title came out, all the intimacy that had once existed between them seemed to be cut cleanly by a blade. Adrian looked up at her, his expression calm. "Ms. Sullivan. Sit." Vanessa sat. Legal, finance, and project leads took their seats one after another. There was no small talk. The meeting began quickly. Vanessa took out the proposal and tried to make her voice sound steady. "Sullivan Group's new materials project has completed trial production. There is no issue with the technical route. The biggest difficulties now are channels and cash flow. If Lawson Capital is willing to step in, we can give up 35% of the project equity. The bridge loan can be priced at 2 points above market rate." She spoke professionally. So professionally that it seemed like an ordinary business negotiation. Adrian listened quietly until she finished. Then he turned the document forward one page. A $45 million bridge loan for 35% of the project equity. He lifted his eyes. Ms. Sullivan. Do you think Sullivan Group is still worth that price? Vanessa's face paled slightly. The technology is still in our hands. 6 members of your core technical team resigned last month. 3 of them joined companies connected to the Whitmores. Adrian's tone was faint. The technical barrier you mentioned has already been hollowed out until only a shell remains. Vanessa's fingertips tightened. Adrian continued. As for channels. You changed agents 4 times in 3 years. Your bad debt rate on receivables is 3 times the industry average. The production line is mortgaged to the bank. And the factory district is still tied up in 2 lawsuits. You're using all this to negotiate a bridge loan 2 points above market with me. Every sentence precisely tore open the holes in her proposal. Vanessa sat there, her face growing paler and paler. 3 years ago, when she had been forced to the edge of the cliff in front of outsiders, Adrian had taken over the battlefield for her. 3 years later, the person sitting across from her and forcing her speechless had also become Adrian. How ironic. Then what does Chairman Lawson mean? She heard herself ask. Adrian pushed another document in front of her. Lawson Capital can take over. Vanessa lifted her eyes sharply. But he continued without a trace of warmth. Not cooperation. Acquisition. The conference room was deathly silent. Vanessa opened the document. The first page was the acquisition plan. Lawson Capital would take over Sullivan Group's new materials project at the lowest valuation, assume part of the bank debt, and retain core employees. But Vanessa herself had to exit the project's management team and keep only a symbolic consultant seat. This was not saving her. This was taking the company she had built with her own hands away from her. Her lips turned white. Adrian Lawson. Do you really have to do this? This sentence was finally not Ms. Sullivan speaking to Chairman Lawson. It was Vanessa speaking to Adrian. No one else in the conference room dared to breathe. Adrian only looked at her. Ms. Sullivan. This is a business negotiation. Vanessa's eyes reddened instantly. Those words were heavier than any humiliation. Back then, she could let go of his hand at the wedding for the sake of her company. Now she deserved to have him settle everything clearly with her in the form of a business negotiation. I know. She lowered her head and forced her tears back. But the condition is too low. Sullivan Group didn't survive until now just to be taken by you at a bargain price. Adrian finally smiled. Then what did you survive for? Vanessa looked up. His eyes were cold. For Julian Wells's overseas fund. For the trap the Whitmores laid. Or for the, I will, you said at that wedding 3 years ago. Vanessa's face went deathly pale. Adrian closed the file. His voice not loud but every word clear. Vanessa Sullivan. Of course you can choose any road for the company. I told you 3 years ago. Make your own decision. Now the result has come out. You can't expect me to pay for your decision the way I used to. She was speechless. The meeting ended unhappily. When Vanessa walked out of Lawson Capital with the documents, it had started raining outside. Her assistant held an umbrella for her. But she stood on the steps without moving. She looked back at the towering office building. Adrian did not come after her. 3 years ago, she had not chased him out on the hotel floral path. 3 years later, he would no longer chase after her either. This was karma. She smiled once. But tears fell. When she returned to the company, the board was already in chaos. Some cursed Lawson Capital for taking advantage of their crisis. Some cursed Vanessa for failing to judge people back then. Some simply proposed that she step down and allow the board to find another buyer. Vanessa sat at the head of the table and did not say a word. Only after everyone had argued themselves tired did she lift her head. I'll sign Lawson Capital's proposal. The conference room instantly fell silent. Mr. Sullivan stood abruptly. Vanessa. Are you insane? That's the same as handing Sullivan Group to Adrian Lawson. If I don't hand it to him, the bank will apply to freeze our assets tomorrow. Vanessa's voice was flat. By then, it won't only be me. Every employee, every supplier, every person who has worked for the Sullivan family for half their life will be dragged down. She looked at the faces around the table. Some angry, some avoiding her gaze, and suddenly felt very tired. I've made enough mistakes over these 3 years. I don't want this final one to be another mistake. On the day of signing, Vanessa went to Lawson Capital alone. She did not bring a lawyer. She did not bring an assistant. When Adrian saw her, his brows moved slightly. Your legal team isn't coming. They've already reviewed the terms. She placed the document on the desk. I'll sign. Adrian looked at her. She was even thinner than the last time they met. There were faint shadows beneath her eyes. But she was no longer forcing herself to be sharp like that day. She was excessively quiet. As if she had finally ground all her unwillingness into pieces and swallowed it. Vanessa Sullivan. For the first time. He called her full name. You know what signing means. I know. You will lose control of Sullivan Group. You will also lose the CEO position you care about most. Vanessa's hand paused around the pen. Then she smiled softly. I lost that myself long ago. Adrian said nothing. She lowered her head and signed page after page. When she reached the final page, the pen suddenly stopped. There. She had to sign the personal confirmation of withdrawal from management. She stared at that line for several seconds. Then a tear suddenly struck the paper, blurring a little ink. She immediately raised her hand to wipe it away. Sorry. Adrian watched the frantic way she wiped her tears. And for some reason, his mind flashed back to the conference room 3 years ago. Back then, she had been like this too. Eyes red yet forcing herself not to let anyone see her fear. The difference was that back then, he would feel heartache. Now, he only felt calm. Heartache also had a limit. Once it was used up, it was truly gone. Vanessa finally finished signing all the documents and put down the pen. Adrian Lawson. She lifted her head. Her voice very soft. For that wedding back then. I owe you an apology. Adrian lowered his eyes to the documents and did not respond. As if afraid she would lose the courage to finish. She spoke faster. I know saying this now is ridiculous. I also know you don't need it anymore. But I still want to tell you that day. It wasn't that I didn't want to marry you. I was just too stupid. I thought that as long as the company survived, we would still have a future. I thought you would wait for me to explain. I thought. Her voice choked. I thought you would always stand there. Adrian finally lifted his eyes. His gaze was calm to an almost cruel degree. Vanessa Sullivan. No one will stand in place forever. Her face paled. I know. You don't. Adrian leaned back in his chair. His tone faint. You only lost now. So you remembered me. That sentence was too ruthless. Vanessa's tears surged again. But she did not refute him. Because even she could not tell. If Sullivan Group had not failed. If Julian had not run. If the road she chose back then had truly succeeded. Would she still remember Adrian's back as he left the hotel entrance? Maybe she would. Maybe she would not. The hardest thing to face was never that someone looked down on you. It was realizing that someone had seen through you. You're right. She wiped away her tears. Stood. And bowed deeply to him. But no matter what. Thank you for being willing to save Sullivan Group. The employee arrangements and supplier debts. I know you could have pushed much harder. Adrian did not deny it. His acquisition price was indeed low. But he had also preserved Sullivan Group's final layer of dignity. He took the project. Assumed the debts. Retained the employees. And even did not pursue the old accounts that Julian and the Whitmores had once tangled up. This was business. It was also the last bit of sentiment he gave the past. After you leave, contact my HR department. Vanessa froze. Adrian pushed another document toward her. The consultant seat is not for show. The new project needs transition. You know the production line and team better than anyone. 3 months. Finish the handover. Vanessa stared at him blankly. In that instant, an inappropriate flicker of hope actually rose in her heart again. But Adrian's next sentence immediately extinguished it. It's only business. She lowered her head and said softly. I understand. The Whitmores came knocking the day after the acquisition news was announced. They had originally thought Sullivan Group was already meat on the chopping block. Once the bank froze its assets and the creditors forced pressure, they would be able to swallow its core assets at the lowest price. No one expected Adrian to suddenly make a move. Grant Whitmore, the eldest son of the Whitmore family, personally went to Lawson Capital. In conference room 1. Grant placed his teacup on the table and smiled coldly. Chairman Lawson. Eating alone isn't very nice. Is it? We Whitmores spent 3 years setting up Sullivan Group. Now you reach out and pick the fruit. Isn't that against the rules? Adrian flipped through documents and did not even lift his eyelids. What you set up was a trap. What I did was an acquisition. One can't see the light. The other is written into a contract. If Mr. Whitmore wants to talk rules, first distinguish which side you're standing on. Grant's face darkened. Don't think that just because Lawson Capital is rising fast, you can cover the sky with one hand in this industry. Adrian smiled. He pushed a USB drive to the center of the table. Before you came, I was still considering when it would be most appropriate to hand this to regulators. Grant stared at the USB drive, his brow twitching hard. What do you mean? The fund flows Julian Wells left behind before leaving the country. The false betting agreements. The malicious shorting materials. And evidence that the Whitmores used affiliates to pull away Sullivan Group's core clients. Adrian lifted his eyes and looked at him. Tell me, if these are submitted, can the Whitmores still pass this year peacefully? Grant's face finally changed. He had not expected Adrian's move to be a temporary interception. Adrian had been waiting all along. Waiting until Sullivan Group held on to the very end. Waiting until the Whitmores thought victory was certain. Waiting until the entire chain of evidence was complete enough to seal the throat with one strike. Adrian Lawson. You're tearing up relations with the Whitmores for a woman. You're overthinking it. Adrian took back the USB drive. 3 years ago, you used Julian's hand to throw dirty water over my wedding. I never forgot that debt. His tone was not heavy, but it made Grant's back chill. I'm not doing this for her. I'm doing it for myself. After that day, several Whitmore projects were investigated one after another. Julian Wells did not manage to run for long either. He was cornered overseas by creditors and was finally extradited back to cooperate with the investigation. The day the news came out, Vanessa was in Lawson Capital's temporary office organizing handover materials. When she saw the photo of Julian being taken away on the screen, her fingers stopped for a long time. The man in the photo no longer looked clean and gentle. His face was ashen, his eyes evasive, and he looked as pathetic as a scam finally exposed. She suddenly remembered the caramel macchiato in the cafe 3 years ago. So sweet. Sweet until the end. When all that remained was bitterness. Consultant Sullivan. Chairman Lawson asked you to deliver the production line transition report. The secretary reminded her from the doorway. Vanessa closed the news page and picked up the file. All right. Adrian's office door was not fully closed when she knocked and entered. Besides Adrian, there was a young woman inside. The woman wore a neat light gray suit, her long hair pinned up. She was discussing an overseas acquisition case with him. She spoke clearly, her eyes bright, and when she looked at Adrian, there was a natural rapport. Vanessa's steps paused slightly. Adrian looked up. Leave it here. The young woman also turned to look at her and nodded politely. Consultant Sullivan. Vanessa placed the file down and heard Adrian introduce her. Claire Morgan, head of Lawson Capital's overseas division. Claire smiled. I've heard a lot about you, Ms. Sullivan. A polite phrase. Nothing special. But Vanessa clearly felt that when Adrian looked at Claire, there was no coldness in his eyes. It was not the burning gaze he had once used on Vanessa. Nor was it the business-like distance he used with her now. It was a kind of equal, trusting, comfortable ease. Her heart suddenly became terribly sour. So it was not that he would never be gentle again. He simply would never be gentle to her again. I'll head out first. She turned to leave. Adrian suddenly called her. Vanessa Sullivan. She looked back. You'll attend tomorrow's creditor communication meeting too. Those old suppliers only recognize you. You speaking will be more effective than my people pressuring them. Okay. Still business. She nodded and walked out of the office. The moment the door closed, she leaned against the hallway wall and slowly exhaled. 3 years ago, she had always felt that Adrian being by her side was only natural. Now she had finally learned that every time he called her back, she should stop imagining things. The creditor communication meeting did not go smoothly. Those suppliers had been dragged along for too long and were filled with resentment. Some slammed the table. Some cursed Vanessa for being ungrateful on the spot. Some held banners and blocked the conference room entrance, saying she had sold Sullivan Group to Capital and wanted to dump old debts. Vanessa stood and bowed to everyone. Uncles. Seniors. I admit the money owed to you. The conference room gradually quieted. She lifted her head. Eyes red but not avoiding anyone. Sullivan Group reached this point because of my decision-making mistakes. Julian Wells's funding. The Whitmore's betting terms. The pace of expansion. Every signature was mine. I won't push the blame onto anyone else. After Lawson Capital's acquisition, repayment will be made in batches according to the restructuring plan. The cycle will be long, and the amount will be discounted. But I guarantee every sum will be written into the contract. You can curse me, but please give the project a chance to survive. Someone sneered. You guarantee it? What do you have left to guarantee with? Vanessa's face paled. Adrian, who had been sitting beside her, finally spoke. If her guarantee isn't enough, is Lawson Capital's enough? Everyone looked at him. Adrian placed a document on the table. In the restructuring plan, Lawson Capital will add a special debt repayment fund. Small suppliers and employee arrears will be paid first. Large debts will enter a 3-year proportional repayment plan. The finance director froze. Clearly, this had not been part of the original arrangement. Vanessa froze too. Adrian did not look at her. He only looked at the creditors. I took over this project not to let it rot in curses. You gave Sullivan Group a chance before. Now I'm giving you a definite answer. The meeting lasted from afternoon until late night. When the last creditor left, Vanessa sat in her chair, nearly drained. Adrian collected the documents and prepared to leave. She suddenly called him. Adrian Lawson. He stopped. She looked at him. Her voice hoarse. Thank you. Adrian said lightly. No need to thank me. This project still has value. Stabilizing the supply chain is a necessary cost. Vanessa smiled bitterly. You're not even willing to let me misunderstand one kind word now. Adrian looked at her. Misunderstandings hurt people. Her eyes heated from the sting of that sentence. But she still nodded. I know. The 3-month transition period passed quickly. The last time Vanessa went to the old factory district, the weather was sunny. The old employees stood at the gate to see her off. Some called her Ms. Sullivan with red eyes. She smiled and corrected them, saying they should stop calling her that and just call her Vanessa. But everyone still called her Ms. Sullivan. She did not insist again. Outside the factory, Adrian's car was parked by the road. He had not come specially to see her off. He had merely come to attend the production line reopening ceremony. After the ribbon cutting, the media surrounded him for interviews, asking why Lawson Capital was willing to take over a project with so many problems. Adrian faced the camera, his voice steady. Because it is worth it. Vanessa stood outside the crowd, and her eyes suddenly reddened. She knew he meant the project, not her. But even so, she felt it was enough. On the day her resignation procedures were completed, she placed her consultant badge at the front desk. The secretary handed her an envelope. Miss Sullivan, Chairman Lawson asked me to pass this to you. Vanessa opened it. Inside was a bank card and an explanation. The bank card contained part of the refunded expenses remaining after the wedding had been cancelled back then, as well as a breakdown of several payments she had once mistakenly believed the company had paid, but which Adrian had actually advanced personally. At the bottom, there was a line written in Adrian's own handwriting. The accounts are settled. From now on, walk well on your own. Vanessa stared at that line for a long time. Tears fell one by one. The accounts were settled. But some things could never be settled. She returned the bank card and took only that piece of paper. 1 year later, Vanessa opened a small consulting company in Southport, specializing in supply chain risk control for startups. She no longer wore those sharp, armor-like designer suits. Nor did she treat the title of CEO as her life. When someone asked why she did not stay at a big company, she smiled. She said she had once taken too great a fall, and now she only wanted to help others fall a little less. She would still occasionally see news about Adrian. The new materials project acquired by Lawson Capital successfully went public in the 2nd year after restructuring. On the day of the launch event, Adrian stood on stage, surrounded by the project team and Claire. When the camera swept past them, Claire leaned in and said something softly to him. He turned his head to listen, and there was a very faint smile at the corner of his mouth. That smile was not passionate, but it was real. Vanessa closed the video and sat in her office for a long time. Her assistant asked what was wrong. She shook her head. Nothing. She had simply understood suddenly that true loss was not the moment someone turned and left. True loss was when, many years later, you finally became better, finally understood things, finally knew who had been the most precious person back then. But that person no longer needed your understanding. Another half-month passed. Vanessa received a wedding invitation. The invitation was simple. White background. Gold lettering. No exaggerated decoration. Groom, Adrian Lawson. Bride, Claire Morgan. She held the invitation for a long time, her fingertip gently brushing over Adrian's name. That night, for the first time, she took the initiative to message Adrian. "Congratulations on your wedding." After sending the message, she thought there would be no reply. But 10 minutes later, her phone lit up. Adrian replied with 2 words. "Thank you." Polite. Distant. Respectable. Like the ending they should have had. On the wedding day, Vanessa did not go. She bought a bouquet of white roses and placed it by the office window. Sunlight shone in, and the petals looked as clean as the wedding aisle from many years ago. She stood by the window and whispered, "Adrian Lawson. I'm sorry. And thank you." No one answered her. But she knew he no longer needed to hear it. Adrian's wedding was not extravagant. But everything was thoughtful. There was no exaggerated flower wall. No long, overly emotional process. No segment deliberately proving happiness. Claire wore a simple wedding dress and stood in front of him, smiling brightly and openly. When they exchanged vows, Claire said, "I don't need you to always stand in front of me and block everything. But I hope that no matter what we face in the future, we can stand on the same side." Adrian looked at her. After pausing for a few seconds, he smiled. "Okay." Applause sounded below the stage. In that moment, he suddenly thought of long ago, when he had also stood at the end of another wedding, waiting for someone to walk toward him. Back then, he had thought loving someone meant steadying all the things around her that were about to collapse. Later, he finally understood. The person who can truly walk with you will not make you stand in place forever and wait. After the wedding, his secretary handed him a gift list. Chairman Lawson. Miss Sullivan didn't come, but she sent a gift. Adrian took it and saw that it was a donation certificate for an employee mutual aid fund in the old factory district. Donor, Vanessa Sullivan. Purpose, hardship relief for old employees of Lawson New Materials Project. He looked at it for a moment and closed the gift list. Claire walked over and asked, "Who sent it?" "An old friend." Claire looked at his expression and did not ask further. She only held his hand. "That's nice." Adrian nodded. "It is. Some people are destined to accompany you for only one stretch of road. They teach you pain. Teach you to wake up. Teach you not to hand your heart so easily to someone unworthy. And some people will stand beside you after you have learned to let go. They will not ask you to block all the wind and rain for them. They will only be willing to look at the road ahead with you." That cooperation deal 3 years later was later discussed widely by the outside world. Some said Adrian was cold-blooded, acquiring his former fiancée's company at a low price when she was in trouble. Others said he was honorable enough. After being abandoned at the altar in public, he still helped Sullivan Group protect its employees and debts in the end. Adrian never explained. In business, winners do not need explanations. And in love, explaining things to people who do not understand is a waste from the beginning. Vanessa did not explain either. She wrote that experience into the first lesson of her company's training course. The title was, "Do Not Take a Lifeline for Granted." After hearing it, many young entrepreneurs asked her what happened to the person in the story. She always smiled. "He's doing well. And you?" She looked out the window. The sunlight in Southport fell gently on the street. "I'm becoming better too." This was not the ending she wanted. But it was the ending she deserved. As for Adrian, he had long walked out of the farce on that grand wedding day. He had walked out of Vanessa's belated regret. He had also walked out of the version of himself who had once lowered himself into the dust for love. Later, at a business forum, the host asked him, "Chairman Lawson, after so many years in investment, what do you value most?" The audience was full of entrepreneurs and media. Adrian picked up the microphone and thought for a moment. "Exit mechanisms." Someone in the audience laughed. The host followed up. "Is it the same in relationships?" He turned his head and glanced at Claire below the stage. His eyes softened a little. "Even more so in relationships. If a relationship keeps making you lose, keeps overdrawing you, keeps forcing you to prove your own value, then it is time to cut your losses. Someone truly worth it will not let you lose that badly." As applause sounded, Vanessa was sitting in front of her computer watching the live stream. She did not cry. She only gently took out the note she had saved for many years from her drawer. "The accounts are settled. From now on, walk well on your own." She placed the note into the shredder. The machine hummed. The white paper was cut into thin strips. As if the last bit of obsession had finally been cut apart too. The sunlight outside the window was just right. Vanessa turned off the live stream, opened a new project proposal, and wrote 3 words on the first page: "Start over." On the other side of the city, Adrian walked down from the forum stage. Claire handed him a bottle of water and asked with a smile, "Chairman Lawson, you sound so familiar with exit mechanisms. Did you suffer a big loss before?" Adrian took the water, opened it, and drank. Claire raised a brow. "How much did you lose?" He looked at her. His smile was faint, but real. "I almost lost myself." Claire smiled too. "And now?" Adrian held her hand and walked through the crowd toward the sunlight. "Now I've earned it back." The extra story was very short. On the first anniversary of Lawson New Materials going public, a new sign was hung again at the entrance of the old factory district. The old employees whose wages had once been delayed received their back pay and their first project bonus. Someone secretly sent Vanessa a group photo. In the photo, everyone stood in front of the new workshop, smiling happily. Vanessa looked at it for a long time and replied with 2 words: "So good." She did not ask about Adrian again. Nor did she inquire about his life again. She had finally learned to leave regrets where they were, instead of taking them out again and again to disturb someone else's happiness. That afternoon, Adrian passed by the old factory district. The driver asked if he wanted to go in and take a look. Through the car window, he saw the brand new sign at the entrance and thought of the acquisition agreement she had signed 3 years ago. His expression was faint. No need. The car slowly drove away. He no longer needed to look back and confirm anything. The old accounts. The old people. The wedding that had been trampled into pieces in public. All of it had already been settled line by time and results. In this life, the most satisfying revenge is never forcing someone into a dead end. It is finally standing high enough to watch the person who once looked down on you, betrayed you, and abandoned you gaze up at you from across a sea of people, while no longer having the right to come near you. Adrian Lawson did it. All right. That's all for today's story. Please remember to subscribe and leave a comment.